Hello and welcome to this edition of World at War. My name is Mohammed Saleh. Has Benjamin Netanyahu crossed the red line that was drawn for him by the American President Joe Biden? Because for the first time since the Israeli onslaught on Gaza began, Joe Biden has made it clear that he'll halt the transfer of American weapons to Israel if Netanyahu goes ahead with the ground invasion of Rafah. As we speak, more than 34,900 Palestinians have been killed and over 70,000 Palestinians have been grievously wounded and maimed in this Israeli onslaught. And yet the Israeli Prime Minister has continued to insist that he'll press forth with his assault on Rafah, where more than 1.4 million Palestinians have sought refuge. For the common people, the scale of the American involvement in this war is not immediately clear. The United States hasn't just been supplying weapons to Israel, but has been providing Israel with intelligence, satellite imagery and even targets that Israel has gone in and specifically bombed in this war. But what does this public fallout between Joe Biden and Benjamin Netanyahu mean in the larger context of this war? This is a rerun of an all too familiar scene for the Palestinians ever since the State of Israel was brought into existence 7 decades ago. The young and the old, the firm and the mutilated, in cars or on mule carts, packing their belongings and fleeing with whatever basic essentials of life that they can carry. According to the Israeli forces, more than 300,000 Palestinians have now been forced out of Rafah, the last place of refuge with functioning civic facilities. But a campaign of Israeli airstrikes is now systematically targeting the infrastructure in Rafah. Rafah's entry point into Egypt has been taken over by Israel and has been slammed shut. Israel has also surrounded Rafah with hundreds of its tanks, and pitched bombardment into arguably the most densely populated tent city in the world at the moment has meant that the risk of casualties is enormous. Even the few barely functional hospitals in Rafah are now beginning to shut down.
There is no hospitals effectively now. An-Najjar hospital is out of service, and the Kuwaiti hospital just for trauma and for the emergency. We have no beds or no hospitals to refer it, especially for critical patients, for neurosurgical patients, and for ICU patients. We are referring to a European hospital, which is not accessible now, and we are referring to the field hospitals, for example, IMC and other hospitals, the field hospitals, ICRC, which is not ready. They are still not opening till now, but IMC is ready, but for surgical cases only, not for ICU, not for neurosurgical or vascular cases. So there are no any place to refer the patients inside Rafah. The situation is most of them who are critical are dying in the field, are dying in the field hospitals, or dying in the Kuwaiti and other field hospitals.
From one moment to the next, the Palestinians have no idea which moment would be their last one. Mohammed Khalil Abu Qanas was sitting at his home with his family when his neighbor's house was bombed.
We were baking bread. Suddenly we were covered in blood and saw mortars scattered. We gathered their body parts in pieces. The civil defense members came and gathered them in pieces. My friend died. They also picked him in pieces. Everything is in pieces. We were behind the attacked house. Glass shards fell on us. Good thing it was on our legs. There were martyrs and wounded all around.
Charity kitchens, who played a key role in providing food to the starving Palestinians in this conflict, say that they would not be able to function in the event of a ground invasion by the Israelis.
Approximately 80% of people rely on food from charity kitchens as they are unable to provide their own meals or drinks. Their entire dependency lies on these charity kitchens. If these kitchens were to close, they would have no means of food and drinks. Many individuals have approached us with similar concerns, urging us to attempt to reopen kitchens in their displacement location. We too seek shelter and support.
But on the other side of the border in Egypt, there are hundreds of trucks full of food and humanitarian aid. But for many months now, these trucks haven't been allowed to move an inch. In the Israeli town of Mitzpe Ramon, Israeli demonstrators have blocked a key road to protest and to prevent the delivery of humanitarian aid to the starving Palestinians in the Gaza Strip. And amidst this mayhem came the very first reports that the United States of America will block the delivery of a weapons consignment to the State of Israel. Shipment of heavy bombs, including as many as 1,800 2,000-pound bombs and 1,700 500-pound bombs, along with Boeing's Joint Direct Attack Munitions, otherwise known as JDAMs, that essentially convert dumb bombs into precision bombs, have now been put on hold.
As we assess the situation in Rafah, we made the decision to pause this one shipment. Again, as I highlighted, a final determination has not been made on how to proceed with that shipment, but specifically, we're focused on the end use, especially rather focused on the end use of the 2,000-pound bombs and the impact that they could have in a dense urban setting, as we've seen in other parts of Gaza.
The American President Joe Biden, in this war so far, had given a blank check support to the State of Israel, resulting in the killings of over 34,000 Palestinians, two-thirds of whom are innocent women and children. But President Biden had also repeatedly said that a ground invasion of Rafah would be a red line. But Netanyahu has vowed to fight on, as a lone wolf, even without American weapons, and if need be, even with his fingernails.
We are on the eve of Independence Day. In the War of Independence 76 years ago, we were the few against the many. We did not have weapons. There was an arms embargo on Israel. But with great strength of spirit, heroism, and unity among us, we were victorious. Today, we are much stronger. We are determined and we are united in order to defeat our enemies and those who want to destroy us. If we need to stand alone, we will stand alone. I have said that, if necessary, we will fight with our fingernails. But we have much more than our fingernails, and with that same strength of spirit, with God's help, together we will win.
Even within Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu's war is deeply unpopular, as it has completely failed in securing the release of hostages. Netanyahu has not shown enough inclination to bring home the Israeli hostages, even though a deal is on the table. But wars have clear political consequences. For Joe Biden, the longer this war drags on, the more it damages his prospects to get re-elected in the November elections. But for Netanyahu, the moment this war ends, he'd find it untenable to hold on to his Prime Minister's chair, as his popularity is sunk and he faces serious charges of corruption. Has the world turned its back on Sudan? The Sudan conflict between the Sudanese armed forces and its former ally, the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces, erupted on the 15th of April last year. According to a recent Human Rights Watch report, tens of thousands of people have been killed, including up to 15,000 people in the West Darfur town of El Janina. In addition to this, about 8.5 million people have been uprooted from their homes. But in the backdrop of the humanitarian crises in Ukraine and Gaza, the 13-month-long civil war in Sudan has drawn less international scrutiny and has been dubbed as the Forgotten War. And all eyes are now on El Fasher, the state capital of North Darfur. The United States has warned of a disaster of epic proportions in El Fasher if the RSF proceeds with an expected attack. Our next report gets you more details.
Africa's third largest country by size, the Republic of Sudan, has been ravaged by war for more than a year. with no signs of abating. It is now feared that a new front has opened up around the town of El Fasher in North Darfur, where, compounding the matters, the population is already on the brink of starvation. El Fasher is the only capital of the 5 Darfur states not controlled by the RSF. Home to 800,000 civilians, the town was, until recently, relatively unaffected by the fighting, but since mid-April, bombardments and clashes have been reported in the surrounding villages.
The latest reports of escalating hostilities in El Fasher, the capital of North Darfur, are a fresh cause for deep alarm. Over the weekend, RSF-affiliated militias attacked and burned villages west of the city, leading to widespread new displacement and fears of a takeover of El Fasher, that is the capital of North Darfur, and a city with hundreds of thousands of inhabitants. Fighting continued today on the outskirts of El Fasher. Counterattacks have led to more deaths and injuries. And let me be clear, any attack on El Fasher would be devastating for civilians and could lead to a full-blown intercommunal conflict across Darfur. It would also upend aid operations in an area already on the brink of famine, since El Fasher has always been a critical UN humanitarian hub.
The region was ravaged more than 2 decades ago by the scorched earth policy of then-President Omar al-Bashir, which was carried out by the Janjaweed, the Arab militiamen who have since then joined the RSF. According to the United Nations, the 13-month-long civil war in Sudan risks triggering the world's largest hunger crisis. About 25 million people, approximately half of the country's population, are in need of all types of humanitarian assistance, whereas more than 18 million people are grappling with food insecurity in the agriculturally rich nation. Hunger, not just fighting, is rampant across Sudan now, driving displacement. Increasingly desperate people are leaving their homes in search of food, with some even resorting to eating leaves.
The children were collecting tree leaves and eating them. They took mango leaves and ate them. My cousins walked next to the school and collected the tree leaves, cooked them and ate them, because we didn't know if we would have food for breakfast.
El Fasher is on the precipice of a large-scale massacre. It is the grim reality hundreds of thousands in El Fasher are bracing themselves for. In a country which has experienced only brief democratic interludes, this latest conflict between the warring generals has spawned a humanitarian crisis. Will the world pay attention to their urgent needs?
Now, the American and the Philippine armed forces fired missiles and artillery to thwart a simulated invasion in the Philippines' northern waters facing Taiwan on the 6th of May. A couple of days later, a decommissioned China-made Philippine ship was sunk by the Allied forces in the South China Sea War Games. This show of military force and strengthening ties just comes days after their governments had objected to China's dangerous maneuvers in the regional waters. The annual military drills, which commenced last month, ran until the 10th of May, irking China. Will these military drills now result in the destabilization of the region that is already fraught with tensions over China's territorial claims? Our next report gives you more details.
The war games by the US and Philippine forces near the potential flashpoints of the South China Sea and Taiwan kicked off last month. In the annual joint military drills, dubbed Balikatan or shoulder to shoulder in Tagalog, more than 16,700 Philippine and American troops conducted land, sea and air maneuvers at multiple locations across the Asian archipelago. On Monday, about 200 soldiers took turns defending the shores of the coastal city of Laoag, around 400 kilometers south of Taiwan, launching javelin missiles, firing howitzers and machine guns at floating targets about 5 kilometers off the coast.
Bala-Katan centers around, besides those traits that I talked about of transparency, respect of sovereignty, seeking peaceful resolutions, but being prepared for the worst. When we prepare for the worst, what I think we've seen in this Bala-Katan, and I'm excited that we'll continue to refine that, is the key maritime terrain, securing key maritime terrain, either taking it or defending it, which we saw today. And they're all building block approaches that leads to sea control, that will lead to a maritime strike.
In continuation of the drills on Wednesday, the BRP Lake, Caliraya, a small tanker decommissioned by the Philippine Navy in 2020, was sunk after being struck by a wave of anti-ship missiles, rockets, cannon fire and land-based artillery. A US F-16 fighter and an AC-130 gunship along with the Philippine military took part in the simulated attack. When asked about the drills, China's foreign ministry accused the United States and Philippines of provocation.
China has made clear its stern position many times on military cooperation between the United States and the Philippines. I would like to emphasize again that any military exercise should not be targeted at or harm the interests of third parties. It should not damage mutual trust among countries in the region or undermine regional peace and stability. I believe countries in the region can all see clearly who is currently provoking military confrontation and escalating tensions in the region. We advise relevant countries to safeguard their own security and development and maintain regional peace and stability. The only correct choice is to uphold good neighborliness, return to dialogue and consultation, and persist in strategic independence.
These military drills come against the backdrop of increased confrontations between Chinese and Filipino vessels around shoals in the South China Sea, which are claimed by Manila. Manila alleged last week that the Chinese Coast Guard had damaged a Philippine Coast Guard ship. And another government vessel in water cannon attacks around the disputed China-controlled Scarborough Shoal on the 30th of April. Beijing, on the other hand, claims almost the entire South China Sea, despite an international tribunal ruling that its assertion has no legal basis. Hundreds of Coast Guards, Navy and other vessels are deployed by Beijing to patrol and militarize these contested waters. The military exercises by the US and the Philippines have clearly infuriated Beijing, which has warned of destabilization, calling these exercises muscle flexing and confrontation stoking. The important question is, have we reached the tipping point in the South China Sea crisis?
The Myanmar junta is facing the sternest challenge to its authorities since grabbing power in a 2021 coup. An alliance of three Myanmar ethnic minority groups, the Tang National Liberation Army, the Arakan Army and the Myanmar National Democratic Alliance Army, known collectively as the Brotherhood Alliance, has waged a coordinated offensive since the 27th of October last year, thereby unnerving the Myanmar military. The offensive that's been dubbed by the rebels as Operation 1027, signifying the date on which it began, has made inroads into the junta-controlled areas in the northern Shan state, the Kaya state in the east and the Rakhine state in the west. This past week, in the latest blow to the military, an ethnic armed group, the Arakan Army, managed to capture a military command post and took hundreds of junta personnel prisoner in the western Rakhine state. And our next report gets you more details.
Myanmar's countryside and borderlands is home to more than a dozen ethnic rebel groups. These rebels have waged a war against the military over autonomy and control of lucrative resources for decades. The 2021 coup united pro-democracy activists in towns and cities, with the ethnic minority forces fighting in the hinterlands for self-determination. The Arakan army is one of several armed ethnic minority groups battling the military since independence from Britain in 1948. It claims to be fighting for more autonomy for the state's ethnic Rakhine population. On the 6th of May, the Arakan army claimed to have captured Military Operations Command 15 near the town of Buthidaung, about 90 kilometers north of state capital Sittwe. Reportedly, regular clashes took place around Buthidaung in recent days. In a video released by the Arakan army, a long line of men can be seen walking in single file through a field. They were mostly clad in shorts, t-shirts and sandals, with some of them even barefoot. Women and children accompanied the men, with even the injured being carried on makeshift stretchers. The video also shows around 200 people sitting in rows in a clearing, and men in uniform and guns watching over them. In 2019, clashes between the Arakan army and the military had roiled the region, leading to the displacement of around 200,000 people. Following the junta's 2021 coup, a ceasefire largely held in the Rakhine state, but that changed when the Arakan army attacked security forces in November last year. The military still holds sway over the state capital Sittwe, but Arakan army has seized territory in surrounding districts, including military bases on the border with India and Bangladesh. Last month, Bangladesh had repatriated 288 Myanmar nationals, mostly army personnel, escaping the civil war. Earlier, in February this year, some 330 Myanmar soldiers and officials were repatriated from Cox's Bazar in Bangladesh. Indian authorities, too, have been sending back the Myanmar army personnel within days of them crossing over. Ever since the November outbreak, fighting has now spread to 15 of Rakhine State's 17 townships. Hundreds have been killed or wounded, and more than 300,000 uprooted from their homes. With a strength of 15,000 fighters, the Brotherhood Alliance is believed to have overrun more than 100 military posts, captured border crossings and the vital roads carrying most of the overland trade with China. The successive setbacks has weakened military hold on power and put them at their most vulnerable in the last 60 years. The big question is, how long can the Myanmar military manage to hold on to power?
And with that's a wrap on this edition of World at War. If you want to reach out to me with any comments, feedback or suggestions, feel free to do so on the ID that you're seeing on your screens. I'm your host, Mohammed Saleh, and I'll see you again next week.